Welkom terug by Nuusdag Perspektief. Ons gaan voort. Menslike hulpbronne beamptes en senior bestuurders het saam gekonkel om gevalle van seksuele teistering by die SABC toe te smeer. Nou, dit is volgens die bevindings van die Uitsaaiers Kommissie van Ondersoek na Seksuele Teistering. Die kommissie het 10 sake wat direk deur slagoffers ingedien is en 7 wat deur vletjieblassers ingedien is hersien. Nou, nie een van die beweerde oortreders is opgeskort of aangekla van seksuele teistering nie. Die beweerde oortreders het dikwels aanhou werk en is later skuldig bevind op 'n laer klag, soos onprofessionele gedrag. Nou, om seksuele teistering in die werkplek te bespreek, sluit die menslike hulpbronne konsultant en onafhanklike nie-uitvoerende direkteur Jenny Jeftha by ons aan. Goeienaand Jenny en welkom.
Dankie Almes.
Nou, as 'n menslike hulpbron spesialis, was jy geskok met die onthullings uit die kommissie wat by die SABC gebeur het, en is hierdie soort gedrag miskien algemeen in die kommersiële bedryf soos korporasies, maatskappye en in organisasies in Suid-Afrika?
Ja. Kijk, natuurlijk is de mens geskok. I think one of the big challenges is that when you are dealing with a national broadcaster and an organization in South Africa where labor legislation is underpinned by a Bill of Rights that enables employees or grants employees access to all kinds of mechanisms to deal with matters such as these in the workplace. And you find that an organization such as the SABC does not enable an environment that is free of sexual harassment. You have to be shocked. It is particularly shocking because sexual harassment is, in terms of the Employment Equity Act, labelled as an unfair discriminatory practice, both in terms of sexual orientation and gender. And so when one looks at the impact of sexual harassment on the culture in an organization, then it becomes even more alarming because seemingly based on the Commission's findings, there is a systemic deterioration of a climate which is meant to protect its employees.
Now, talking about that culture, die meerderheid van die seksuele teistering klagtes by die SAIK was deur vryskut personeel ingedien. Nou, dink jy dat vryskutters meer kwesbaar is in die werkplek as dit by hierdie soort gedrag kom?
Yeah. Look, I think there is a bit of vulnerability in the sense that freelancers generally don't have the similar contractual arrangements as permanent employees would have. However, freelancers are protected by the same legislation that any employee in South Africa is protected. So they are really afforded the same rights as any permanent employee is afforded. Now, they may be vulnerable and it may be open to exploitation based on the contractual arrangements that they have, but they have the same access to deal with a matter or to address a matter and to seek redress in terms of a matter such as this. So essentially the same obligations on the employer that applies to a permanent employee applies to a freelancing employee.
As die menslike hulpbron departement of die HR department, is hulle daar om hierdie mense ook te beskerm?
Natuurlijk is hulle daar. Kyk, menslike hulpbronne they provide a service. And the service essentially applies to everyone. So elke werknemer moet beskerm word in 'n sin. And there should not be added discrimination. So sexual harassment is already a form of discrimination. And when human resources determines whether they provide a service or support to a freelancer or a permanent employee and further exacerbates that discrimination, then certainly a freelancer would be on the receiving end of being discriminated twice in a sense.
Nou, hier is 'n skokkende ding. Die kommissie van ondersoek het gevind, en ek haal aan in hierdie geval, human resources and the most senior managers demonstrated a serious lack of knowledge and understanding of human rights statutes, gender relations and issues of power relations between men and women. Nou, is 'n gebrek aan HR of aan menslike hulpbron kennis aanvaardbaar in enige organisasie spesifiek by 'n uitsaaier soos die SABC?
Dit is nooit aanvaardbaar nie. You can never excuse ignorance of the law in a matter in an organization where you have trained HR professionals and you have management who have a fiduciary duty to ensure that employees are protected. So we know that we have wonderful legislation in this country. We have a Bill of Rights that protects employees, and that legislation, employment legislation, is literally based on the Bill of Rights that we have. So when we have all this legislation and people plead ignorance, it cannot be regarded as, it's actually inexcusable. So the fact that we have legislation means that the human resource responsibility is to take the legislation, to translate it into a policy, and then to ensure that that policy is implemented in an organization. But that is also not enough, because what you essentially need is you need a culture, and the culture, of course, is underpinned by a set of values that embraces principles of human dignity, respect, transparency, and in an enabling environment for employees to actually address matters such as these.
Nog 'n skokding wat ek vroeër aangehaal het. Nie een van die beweerde oortreders wat was opgeskort of aangekla vir seksuele teistering nie. Wel, hulle was later aangekla op 'n laer klag soos onprofessionele gedrag, maar watter soort straf moet of kan uitgedeel word in die geval van seksuele teistering in die werkplek?
That's quite a tough one to answer, because essentially
Maar moet hulle nie geskort word?
sanction, yes, sanction to in any disciplinary matter is dependent on the nature of the offence. So the obligation an employer has is to obviously investigate a matter the minute it is reported, and based on the outcome of that investigation to then formulate a charge which is appropriate under the circumstances. Now, of course, there are charges that are more serious, and then there are charges which are regarded as minor charges in an organization. Based on the severity and the impact of the nature of the offense, a sanction can range in anything from a verbal warning to a written warning to a final written warning to a dismissal. And organizations also have recourse, of course, or employers who actually are complainants also have recourse to civil and criminal litigation.
Because that was going to be my next question.
Absolutely.
What recourse do they have?
They do have, so they have recourse to external dispute resolution through the CCMA and the Labour Court, but furthermore, they have recourse to criminal and civil litigation as well. And damages can be issued against an organization for failing to protect the employer and the employee. And in that respect, the employee would then be liable to compensate or to pay damages to the aggrieved employee.
Is daar enige beleid, Jenny, wat seksuele uitbuiting en teistering in die werkplek kan voorkom?
Of course, there's a myriad of legislation in this country. So we have, of course, the Employment Equity Act, which defines sexual discrimination as an unfair discriminatory practice. But in addition to that, we have supporting legislation in the form of a code of good practice in terms of managing sexual harassment in the workplace. And that code specifically provides employees with very clear guidelines in terms of how it ought to manage sexual harassment in the workplace. In addition to that, you have the code, Schedule 8 of the Labour Relations Act, which governs how employees should be managed from a termination perspective, so a dismissal perspective. And the one thing about legislation, of course, is that that just affords one with a tick box exercise. So I think what is missing here, and seemingly missing in the situation at the SABC, is the gap between legislation and policy and the implication in terms of the application of that. So when an employee lodges a complaint and the complaint is investigated, the follow-through is then important.
Yes.
In the absence of that, the legislation or the policies are meaningless.
Daar moet ons nou stop, ongelukkig. Maar ons het nog baie vrae vir jou, maar daar moet ons nou stop. Dit was Jenny Jeftha. Sy is 'n menslike hulpbronne konsultant en ook 'n onafhanklike nie-uitvoerende direkteur. Nou dankie dat jy vanaand saam gekyk het saam met ons. Ek groet tot namens die span tot môre aand, dieselfde tyd, dieselfde plek. Totsiens.